Wax? Sam asked. Not just any wax, Boniface said, her voice trembling slightly. From its hue and pigmentation, it is the sort utilized in a traditional Catholic pillar candle, a heavy, expensive kind. I believe we have a killer candlestick, Sam, a sanctified weapon. An opportunistic murder, Felix noted, looking around the darkened chapel. Someone grabbed what was at hand. They didn't come here to kill, but they found they had to. But why? Sam asked. What could an old nun have that was worth killing for? She knew something, Boniface said, reaching into Helena's stiffening hand. She pulled out a crumpled scrap of paper that the old nun had gripped in her final moments. She gave this to a passing postman just before she entered the chapel. It says, in Latin, Sam said. In the chapel, in plain sight, Boniface translated, her mind already racing through the architecture of the building. Chapter 3. The Ghost of the Earl. The investigation turned the convent into a crime scene, a cruel irony for a place that was supposed to be a sanctuary. Sam Gillespie sat in the small office he had set up in the vestry, looking through the list of people who had been in the building during the blackout period. Lord Matthew, Ronnie Panasser, Lynn Goodwin, and our own sisters, Sam listed, and Ruth Penny. She was everywhere yesterday. She has a way of being in rooms she shouldn't be in. Ruth wouldn't kill a nun for a story, Sam Boniface said, entering with a tray of tea and biscuits. Wouldn't she? She's ambitious. Boniface. And this development of the century story is her ticket back to the big leagues. She's tired of being the local girl done good. She wants to be the woman who broke the biggest land scandal in the country. Boniface set the tea down, her gaze searching Sam's face. Is it her ambition you're worried about, Inspector, or the fact that she's back? Sam looked away, focusing on his notes. We need to look at the why before the who. Helena was an archaeologist. She was looking for something, and she found it behind that plaque. They returned to the chapel. The bronze plaque for the late Earl was loose ever so slightly. Boniface used a small screwdriver to pry it away. Behind it was a cavity in the stone, and inside that, a glass jar with a broken wax seal. Empty, Sam noted, his frustration mounting. But not long ago, Boniface added, touching the rim. The dust hasn't settled in the indentation. Something was taken from this jar tonight. Something Helena found. The investigation led them to Lord Matthews. They found him in the manor library, a room that felt like it was slowly being reclaimed by the earth. Stacks of unpaid bills and legal notices covered the grand desk. My father was a man of faith, Matthew said, his voice cracking as he held a glass of whiskey. But he was also a man of secrets. He told me he'd made provisions for the sisters. But I found nothing. Only dead. I'm drowning. Inspector, if this sale doesn't go through, the Sedgwick name ends in a bankruptcy court. I'll be the Earl who sold the family silverware just to keep the roof from falling in. Did Sister Helena know about these provisions? She claimed she did, Matthew admitted, his eyes She confronted me yesterday. She said my father's heart was in this stone, and that I was betraying his soul. We argued. I was angry. I was desperate. But I didn't kill her. I couldn't. Meanwhile, Ruth Penny was conducting her own investigation. She had dug into the local archives and found a connection that chilled her. She found Sam in the courtyard, the moon lighting the tension in her face. Sam, look at this, Ruth said, holding up an old-school photograph. Sister Helena didn't just live here. She used to teach at St. Peter's. And look who her star pupil was. Sam looked at the photo. A young, scowling girl stood next to a younger, sterner sister, Helena. It was Lynn Goodwin. Lynn said Helena made her life a living hell. Ruth whispered. She hated her. She told me once she'd hated nuns ever since. She said Helena was judgmental and cruel. What if Helena found out something about Lynn's past? Something that could ruin her career? The pieces were moving, but they didn't yet form a picture. There was the waxy indentation found on the candlestick, a pattern that looked like a signet ring or a crest. There was the missing document from the glass jar. And there was the impending contract exchange, a countdown to the destruction of St. Chapter 4. The Final Pageant. The day of the quincentennial arrived with a mock celebratory sun. The town gathered in the convent gardens, the air filled with the scent of mown grass and expectation. The sisters, led by Reverend Mother Adrian, stood in their finest habits, their faces masks of serene courage. To the crowd, they looked like statues of The pageant began. Sister Pito declaimed the history of the land, her voice ringing out over the crowd like a clarion call. 500 years, through war and plague, through kings and commoners, the land passed from father to son. The key to each and every one. But the key is not just of iron, and brass, it is a key of service. As the play reached its climax, the symbolic handing of the key to the town, Sister Boniface wasn't watching the stage. She was watching the hands of the guests. She was looking for the mark of a killer. She saw the glint of gold on Lord Matthew's hand. She saw the nervous twitch of Lynn Goodwin's fingers. And then, she saw it. In the model of the developmental, Lord Adam Sedgwick Towers, there was a small decorative crest made of heavy brass. It was used to weight the base of the model. Boniface's eyes widened. She remembered the indentation in the wax on the candlestick. The model, Boniface whispered to Sam, who was standing beside her. The killer didn't wear a ring. They used the model itself as a grip. They gripped the heavy brass corner of the model's base to swing the candlestick with enough force to kill the pattern perfectly. But there was more. The Latin clue, in Socello inconspicu, wasn't about the chapel they were in. Boniface looked toward the woods, her mind clicking into place. The old chapel, Boniface realized, the one in the woods that was deconsecrated a century ago. It's still on the grounds, but it's in plain sight of the main road without being noticed. She slipped away from the crowd, her habit fluttering as she ran toward the ruins on the edge of the estate. Inside the crumbling stone walls, hidden behind a loose brick in the altar of the forgotten chapel, she found it, a leather-bound cylinder. Inside was a deed of gift, signed by the late Earl, witnessed and notarized by a firm that had long since closed. It bequeathed the entire convent and the surrounding lands not to his son, but to the Catholic diocese in perpetuity. The sale was illegal. The land wasn't Matthew's to sell. The Earl had known his son was a gambler and a spendthrift. He had protected the sisters from the grave. She ran back to the gardens just as the speeches were beginning. Lord Matthew was at the podium, his hand trembling as he reached for the fountain pen to sign the final contract with Ronnie. "Stop!" Boniface's voice cut through the air like a bell. The crowd gasped. Sam and Felix moved forward as Boniface held up the deed. "Lord Matthew," she said, her voice filled with a profound, bone-deep sadness. "Your father didn't leave you with debt because he was a bad businessman. He left you with debt because he'd already given his greatest asset back to God. You knew that. Didn't you? You found his letters. You tried to hide the truth." Matthew's face collapsed. The mask of the Earl shattered, leaving only a desperate, broken man. He looked at the model, the vision that was supposed to save him. "She wouldn't stop," Matthew cried, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. Helena found the jar behind the plaque. She knew the deed existed. She was going to tell the bishop. If the sale didn't happen, I'd lose everything. The house, the title. I'd be nothing. "You lost your soul instead, Matthew," Reverend Mother Adrian said, stepping forward with a grace that silenced the crowd. The arrest was quiet. The pageant ended not with a handover of a key to a developer, but with a prayer of thanksgiving that shook the very foundations of the hills. Chapter 5. The Fragrance of Lavender and Forgiveness. In the weeks following the arrest of Lord Matthew, Great Slaughter felt as though it was slowly exhaling a breath it had held for half a century. The scaffolding that had begun to rise around the convent was dismantled, leaving the stone walls to bask in the soft autumn sun. Sister Boniface spent her afternoons in the garden, planting lavender near the spot where Sister Helena had been found. It was a gesture of purification, a way to replace the scent of wax and violence with something that spoke of peace and memory. One evening, Sam Gillespie found her there, leaning on her spade. He looked different, less like a man burdened by the law, and more like someone who had found his own footing again. "The trial dates are set," Sam said. "Matthew is, well, he's cooperative. I think the guilt was heavier than the debt in the end. He's almost relieved to be caught." "Debt can be paid in coin," Inspector Boniface replied, "but a life stolen is a debt that only the Lord can settle." "How is Lynn?" Sam managed a small, sad smile. "She's resigned. The scandal was too much for her political career, but she's found work at the refugee center in Gloucester. She told me the other day that for the first time in years, she doesn't feel like she's hiding from the ghosts of her past." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the shadows lengthen across the cloisters. "And Ruth?" Boniface asked, her eyes twinkling. She's staying," Sam admitted, a flush creeping up his neck that made him look like a schoolboy again. "At least for a while. She's taken a desk at the local paper. says Great Slaughter has more stories in its cobblestones than London has in its skyscrapers. And she says, she